You ever walk into a place and immediately feel unwelcome? Yeah, that's exactly what happened to Marcus. Now, Marcus wasn't just some random guy walking into this store. No, he had a reason to be there. A big one, but we'll get to that later. 4. Now, let's talk about who messed up. Meet Rick. Rick was the store manager at a high-end clothing shop in a busy shopping district. And if there was one thing you needed to know about Rick, he was a grade A jerk. He was the type of guy who judged people immediately. Didn't matter if you had money or not. If you didn't look like you belonged, he'd make sure you felt like you didn't. And unfortunately for him, today was the day he picked the wrong person to mess with. Marcus walked into the store, dressed casually, hoodie, jeans, sneakers. Nothing fancy, just comfortable. He wasn't flashy, didn't try to show off, just walked in like any normal customer would, and that's when Rick spotted him. Immediately, his face twisted like he had just smelled rotten eggs. See, Rick thought he knew who Marcus was. Just another guy wasting time, looking at clothes he couldn't afford. But instead of just minding his own business, Rick decided to do what he did best: be a complete and total jerk. Marcus was checking out a designer jacket, running his fingers over the fabric, when he suddenly heard, "Excuse me, sir, but we don't allow browsing if you're not planning to buy anything." Marcus turned, eyebrow raised. "Excuse me?" Rick crossed his arms, looking down at him like he was less than. "You heard me?" Rick said, voice dripping with condescension. "This isn't some thrift store. If you're not here to shop, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Now, let's pause for a second. Marcus hadn't done anything. He wasn't being loud. He wasn't making a mess. He wasn't causing a scene. He was literally just looking at clothes. But Rick? Oh, Rick had already made up his mind. Marcus sighed, shaking his head. "So, let me get this straight. You're kicking me out for what? Looking at a jacket?" Rick scoffed. "I'm kicking you out because you don't belong here." And there it was. Marcus tilted his head. "I don't belong here?" Rick smirked. "Look, buddy, I know your type. You're not buying anything. You're just here to waste time, maybe try to pull some scam. I've seen it all before." Marcus could feel the anger bubbling up, but instead of blowing up, he just smiled. "Oh, you've seen it all before, huh?" he said calmly. Rick grinned, thinking he had just won. "That's right," Marcus chuckled. "That's interesting, because I don't think you've seen what's about to happen next." Rick laughed. "Oh yeah? And what's that?" Marcus took a step closer, still completely calm. "Well," Marcus said, "since you think you know everything, you might want to call your boss." Rick frowned. "What?" "Call your boss," Marcus repeated, staring straight into his eyes. "Because I think there's something very important you're about to find out." Rick rolled his eyes. "Yeah, nice. Try, buddy. My boss is a busy man. He doesn't have time for people like you." Marcus just smiled wider. "Oh, I think he'll make time." Rick snorted. "Oh yeah? Why's that?" Marcus leaned in. "Because I am your boss." And that's when Rick's world came crashing down. Rick's smug grin vanished so fast you'd think someone hit him with a bucket of ice water. "Well, what?" he stammered, blinking at Marcus like he hadn't heard him correctly. Marcus just smiled. "I said, I am your boss. And you? You just made the biggest mistake of your life." For the first time, Rick looked nervous. He let out a forced chuckle, trying to play it off. "Yeah, right. You expect me to believe you—" He waved a hand up and down at Marcus. "Own this store?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Why don't you go ahead and call your district manager? Better yet, check your employee handbook. My name's right at the top." Rick hesitated, his hand twitching toward his phone. Marcus smirked. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Rick swallowed hard. He was still trying to process what was happening. This guy, the same guy he had just insulted and tried to kick out? The owner of the store? No way. No freaking way. Now here's where things get interesting. Instead of admitting his mistake, Rick did what all terrible people do when they get caught. He tried to cover his tracks. He forced a fake laugh. Oh, I see what's happening. This is a prank, right? Some kind of joke? Ha ha ha. Good one, man. You got me? Marcus just stared at him. Does it look like I'm joking? Rick's face twitched. He knew he was screwed, but he wasn't about to go down without a fight. Listen, Rick said, switching to his fake nice voice. I think there's just been a little misunderstanding here. See, I didn't mean to offend you. It's just, I have to be careful. We get all kinds of people in here, and I have to make sure no one is, causing trouble. Marcus tilted his head. Causing trouble? By existing. Rick let out another nervous laugh. No, that's not what I meant. I thought you were, lost. Yeah, I was trying to help you. Marcus chuckled. Help me? By kicking me out of my own store? Rick's face was turning red now. Oh, okay. Maybe I misjudged the situation a little bit. Marcus raised an eyebrow. A little bit? Rick swallowed hard. Okay, fine, a lot. But listen, man, you have to understand. I was just doing my job. Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off. Stop, he said, his voice firm now. Just stop. You weren't doing your job. Your job is to help customers, not judge them based on what they look like. But instead of giving me the same respect you'd give any other shopper, you treated me like I was some criminal. Rick opened his mouth to respond, but Marcus wasn't finished. And let's be real here, Rick, Marcus continued. If I had walked in here wearing a suit and flashing a Rolex, would you have treated me the same way? Rick froze, because they both knew the answer to that question. And that silence, that hesitation, at this point, a few other employees had gathered near the back, pretending to restock shelves while very clearly eavesdropping, and that's when Marcus pulled out his phone. Rick's eyes widened. Oh, wait, what are you doing? Marcus scrolled through his contacts. Oh, just making a quick call. Rick panicked. But hold on now, let's not do anything crazy. Maybe we can… Marcus held up a finger. Shh, I'm on the phone. Rick shut up immediately. The line rang once, twice. Then, hey, Marcus, what's up? It was Darren, the regional director, a.k.a. Rick's boss's boss. Marcus smiled. Hey, Darren. I just had an interesting experience at one of my stores, and I think we need to have a little conversation about your management team. Rick turned pale. He knew what was coming next. And the best part? This was just the beginning of his downfall. Rick was sweating bullets. His entire face had turned a lovely shade of panic red as Marcus stood there, calmly speaking to Darren, the regional director. And the worst part? There was nothing he could do about it. While Marcus spoke, Rick's mind was racing. He had to fix this, fast. As soon as Marcus hung up, Rick jumped into full damage control mode. Look, Marcus, he stammered, forcing the fakest smile imaginable. Buddy, pal, we got off on the wrong foot. I had no idea who you were, and I just, had to make sure the store was safe. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Safe from what, exactly? Rick hesitated. Marcus leaned in. Rick, let me ask you something. Would you have treated me the same way if I were a white guy in a suit? Rick froze. His mouth opened and closed like a broken puppet. And in that silence, Marcus had his answer. Rick tried to force a laugh. Come on, man, I was just doing my job. Marcus smirked. Doing your job? Really? Because from what I saw, you weren't managing this store, you were just managing your own biases. Rick gulped. Look, Marcus, Marcus held up a hand, cutting him off. Save it, he said. You're not sorry you did it. You're just sorry you got caught. Rick's face twitched. He knew he couldn't argue with that. And then, before Rick could say another word, the front doors swung open. Darren, the regional director, walked in like a man on a mission. He was a sharp-dressed, no-nonsense kind of guy. And the second, he He spotted Marcus. He immediately walked over with his hand extended. "Marcus," Darren said, shaking his hand. "Good to see you, man. I got your call. What's going on?" Marcus nodded toward Rick. "Why don't you ask him?" Darren's eyes snapped to Rick, who looked like he was about to pass out. Rick tried to speak, but all that came out was some awkward choking noise. Marcus crossed his arms. "Go on, Rick. Tell your boss what happened." Rick fidgeted. Well, see, there was a, misunderstanding." Darren narrowed his eyes. "Misunderstanding?" Rick forced a laugh. "Ha ha ha, yeah. Just a simple mix-up? No big deal, really. I thought Marcus was, someone else." Darren didn't blink. "Let me get this straight. You tried to kick Marcus, the owner of this store, out of his own business because you thought he didn't belong here." Rick's mouth opened. I mean, Darren turned to Marcus. "Is that accurate?" Marcus nodded. "Oh, yeah. And, trust me, I've got plenty of witnesses." A few employees, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, suddenly found very important work to do on the shelves nearby. Rick was cooked. Darren sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Rick, you know, I've gotten complaints about you before." Rick's eyes widened. What? Darren nodded. "Oh, yeah. Customers saying you were rude, dismissive, and extremely judgmental. But I never had hard proof. Until now." Rick was shaking. But sir, I can change. Darren raised a hand. "Enough." Rick snapped his mouth shut. Darren folded his arms. "Rick, I think we both know where this is going." Rick's face drained of color. No, please." Darren turned to Marcus. "You own the store. What do you want to do with him?" The room went silent. Everyone turned to Marcus. Rick looked like he might actually cry. Marcus took a deep breath, then looked Rick dead in the eye. "You're fired." Rick collapsed. "No, please! I need this job!" Marcus shrugged. "You should have thought about that before you decided to judge people based on their skin color instead of their actual actions." Darren nodded. "I agree. Pack your things?" "Rick." Rick looked around, desperate, as if hoping someone would come to his rescue, but his coworkers just looked away. No one was on his side. Rick had no choice. He trudged to the back, gathered his things, and slowly walked toward the exit. But just before he left, Marcus called out, "Oh, and Rick?" Rick stopped. Marcus smiled. "Next time you see someone walk into a store, try treating them like a human being." Rick clenched his jaw, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out. The second the door shut, the employees erupted into applause. Mia, who had been standing near the register, walked up to Marcus and grinned. "That," she said, "was the most satisfying thing I've ever seen." Marcus chuckled. "Yeah, well, he had it coming." Darren nodded. "And as for you, Marcus, I think it's time you meet the rest of your staff properly." Marcus turned to look at the employees, who now had a mixture of shock, excitement, and relief on their faces. This was his store, and it was time to make some changes. Rick was gone, and just like that, the toxic energy vanished with him. But Marcus? He wasn't done yet, because if Rick had been allowed to act like that for so long, who else in this store had been following his lead? It was time for a full reset. Darren, the regional director, clapped Marcus on the back. "Well, I'd say that was handled perfectly." Marcus smirked. "Yeah, well, it was long overdue." Darren nodded. "And now that you're officially taking a hands-on role, I think it's time you met your staff properly." Marcus turned to look at the employees, who were standing around awkwardly. Some looked relieved, others nervous. One young woman, her Namitag said Jamie, was the first to step forward. I just want to say, I had no idea you were the owner." Marcus chuckled. "That was kind of the point." Jamie smiled. "Honestly, I'm glad Rick's gone. He made this place miserable." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "How so?" She sighed. "Well, for one thing, he only ever treated certain customers with respect, and if we even questioned him about it, he'd act like we were the problem. Another employee, Luis, nodded. Yeah. He used to say stuff like, "Watch that guy, he looks suspicious." And it was always a black or Hispanic customer. But if some rich white guy came in, suddenly Rick was his best friend. Marcus clenched his jaw. That's exactly what I thought. Jamie bit her lip. I mean, some of us wanted to say something, but Rick had been here for so long we figured nothing would change. Marcus crossed his arms. Well, that changes today. Marcus took a deep breath and looked at all of them. Listen up, he said. I don't care how things were done before. That era is over. Starting now, this store will be run the right way. That means respecting every customer, treating everyone fairly, and making sure this is a place where people actually want to shop. The employees nodded quickly. Marcus smirked. Oh, and one more thing. If I ever catch someone pulling the kind of nonsense Rick did, you're out. No second chances. Silence. Then Jamie grinned. Honestly, that sounds amazing. Luis laughed. Best speech I've ever heard at this job. Marcus smiled. Good. Now let's get to work. The next few days? Wild. Marcus completely turned the store around. And the results? Word spread fast. Customers who had avoided the store because of Rick started coming back. People started talking about the changes, and guess who showed up? The man himself, Rick. It happened 2 weeks later. Marcus was at the register, chatting with Jamie, when the doors swung open. And there he was. Rick. He looked different. His usual arrogant confidence? Gone. His suit? Wrinkled. His expression? Desperate. Marcus folded his arms. Well, well, well. Look who it is. Rick cleared his throat. Marcus, hey man, listen, can we talk? Jamie snorted under her breath. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Talk about what? Rick sighed. Look, I made a mistake, all right? I was stupid, but I've been out of work since you fired me, and I need a second chance. Marcus leaned on the counter. A second chance? Rick nodded eagerly. Yes, I swear I'll do better. I'll change. Just, please, I need this. Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. Oh, Rick, he said, shaking his head. You don't get it, do you? Rick blinked. Huh? Marcus leaned in. You already got your second chance, Marcus said. That day you tried to kick me out of my own store, you could have stopped. You could have listened. But instead, you doubled down. You chose this. Rick's face fell. Marcus straightened. Up. So no, Rick. You're not getting your job back. In fact, you're not welcome in this store at all. Rick's jaw dropped. Wait, what? You're banning me? Marcus smirked. You had no problem kicking people out when you were in charge. Guess you know how it feels now. Rick stammered. You can't do that. Marcus shrugged. Oh, but I can. You see, I own this place. Rick stood there, fuming, shaking, looking completely defeated. And then, without another word, he turned and stormed out. And this time, it was for good. Rick was gone. Again. Only this time, for good. But Marcus wasn't the type to just let things slide, because if Rick was willing to treat him that way, someone who owned the store, just imagine how many other people he had mistreated over the years. And that wasn't gonna fly. After Rick's pathetic attempt to beg for his job back, Marcus got curious. He started looking into Rick's past employment records. And what he found? Disgusting. Multiple complaints from customers about discrimination. Reports from former employees saying Rick made the store a toxic work environment. At least 3 cases where people had formally reported Rick to corporate, but nothing had been done. Why? Because Rick was a smooth talker. Every time he got caught, he would say, "It was just a misunderstanding," or "That customer was exaggerating," and somehow he always weaseled his way out. Until now, Marcus wasn't going to let Rick slip through the cracks again. So he did what Rick never saw coming. He gathered every single complaint, every customer review, every incident report, and put it all into a detailed file. Then, he sent it straight to corporate, and not just corporate. Marcus personally emailed the CEO. A week later, Marcus got a call. "Marcus?" It was Darren, the regional director. His voice sounded thrilled. "You're not going to believe this," Marcus grinned. "Try me," Darren chuckled. So, corporate did a deep dive into Rick's history. And let's just say, your report was the final nail in the coffin. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Oh?" Darren laughed. "Oh yeah. Not only is Rick banned from working at any of our company's stores, but corporate sent out a warning to other major retail chains." Marcus smirked. "You mean—" "Oh yeah," Darren said. "Rick's blacklisted." And just like that, Rick went from being a store manager to being completely unemployable. Word spread fast in the retail world. No major stores wanted to hire a guy with a history of discrimination complaints, and without his cushy management position, Rick was forced to take a low-wage job at some rundown gas station across town. A few months later, Marcus stopped by a gas station to grab a drink, and guess who was behind the counter? Rick. He looked miserable. His uniform was wrinkled, his hair was a mess, and the usual arrogance completely gone. Marcus set his drink on the counter and smiled. "Hey, Rick. Long time no see." Rick's face turned red. You... Marcus just grinned. "You gonna kick me out of this store, too?" Rick clenched his jaw but said nothing. Marcus paid for his drink and walked out, leaving Rick stewing in his own failure. Marcus had proven a point. Rick had spent years judging people based on appearances, and now he was on the receiving end of it. Poetic justice at its finest. And as for Marcus, his store thrived. Because when you treat people with respect, good things come back to you. As for Rick, well, let's just say he finally learned what it felt like to be treated unfairly, and that was the perfect ending. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. Don't forget to tap the bell icon to stay updated. Your support means the world.